in reading and hanging with my kids when they spare time to hang with me. And well, I have pets. So unfortunately, I lost my dog in the pandemic. So I have, after a few months, got another one. So I hang with him. He's a baby beagle. So that's basically my unwinding. And now, of course, I've started watching television, but I do a lot of reading, fundamentally. I have this regular breathing regimen, which is deep breathing and, some elements of yoga, some elements of other stuff, which is recommended. And then I do very light exercise, push-ups, and, sometimes go on the treadmill. But that's not more than 20, 25 minutes a day. I like beach resorts. I like mountain resorts. I have them myself, so I go there. I like jungle resorts. If you ask me a country, then I really like Spain and I like Rome. And I could vacation anywhere there. Though I'm being urged by friends now to try France. I mean, post-pandemic. I've not really bought anything which would be like watches or, I don't know, a sports car and stuff like that. But I think my most indulgent purchase has been actually once I went and bought a few hundred books over a full day. And that was in the US, in Barnes and Noble. And I had it all shipped to India because these were books I could not get. And I think they were not available on Amazon or something like that. So that may have been an indulgent purchase. It was a couple of 100 kilos, by the way, of books.
SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Engineering, Medical and Health Sciences, Management, Dental, Science and Humanities, Law, Agriculture Sciences, Hotel Management. Admissions open.
When you live in a fast-moving, ever-changing world, life brings forth unlimited possibilities. Yours to explore, excite, enjoy, educate, evaluate, and elucidate with elan. Never stop moving forward with Darwin Platform Group. Darwin Platform Group, the visionaries.
Thyrocare, the trust, the truth.
Our next panel discussion is on rebuilding businesses. The lockdown hit some businesses very badly. Some actually gained and some others saw demand rising soon after the lockdown happened, but saw it taper off later. To see how different industries fared, we have CEOs from different businesses and how they rebuilt it all. We have with us Mr. Suresh Narayanan, Chairman and Managing Director of Nestle, who saw businesses rise soon after the lockdown happened. Mr. Ravinder Takkar, Managing Director and CEO of Vodafone Idea, that saw rising demand for services, and Mr. Patu Keswani, CMD of Lemon Tree Hotels, who had many hotels shut for an extended period. Moderating this discussion is Rajiv Dubey, Editor Business Today and Managing Editor Business TV Today Network.
Welcome to this last panel in the 2021 edition of Business Today Mind Rush. Rebuilding businesses from the pandemic. The pandemic was truly unprecedented in its scale, in its impact, in the kind of fear psychosis it spread across the world. And so it left almost every organization scrambling for answers to the crisis that we were faced with. And so we have with us three businesses who have dealt with this crisis, are rebuilding their businesses from the pandemic. We have Patu Keswani, who is the chairman and managing director of Lemon Tree Hotels, which represents the travel and tourism industry, badly ravaged by the pandemic, but still not fully recovered. We have two other businesses which had twin problems to grapple with. One was, of course, that every other company was facing, which was the crisis, which was the lockdown. But on the other hand, they had other responsibilities. Suresh Narayanan represents Nestle India, chairman and managing director, representing the FMCG industry, which had to deal with increased demand in the market and were truly COVID warriors in that sense. And Ravinder Takkar, managing director and CEO of Vodafone Idea, represents the telecom industry, which also had to, besides all the problems, had to deal with overloaded networks because almost everybody was working from home. Welcome to all of you, gentlemen. But before we get into rebuilding businesses, I would want to request you to give us a sense of those first few days of the lockdown, and maybe even before, when the lockdown was announced. What was going through your mind? What was the first impressions that you had? What kind of chaos and confusion prevailed in your mind and in your organizations? Mr. Keswani, let me start with you, because your industry was immediately hit and very, very badly hit.
We actually, well, I can say very honestly, I didn't anticipate in February it would be quite so terrible last year. But by early March, it became clear that it would spread. So you see, then I think we did a lot of work internally on what steps we would take for different levels of revenue destruction. So basically we have a BCP plan for events like this. So basically we said what level of destruction of revenue will occur and what will be our response to it. In our case, 70% of our hotels are owned by us. So we have obviously a large amount of debt. Plus, the previous year, we had operationalized about $200 million worth of investments, 250, of which about 150 million was incremental debt. And our business is highly fixed costs, because the main costs are, fixed power costs, people costs, and fees. So what we asked ourselves is three questions. One is, what are the boundary conditions within which we'll operate? So the first was that we will not lay off anybody. We have about 8,200 employees, and we said we will not lay them off, but we will find creative ways to reduce the payroll expense. The second boundary condition was, we felt that if this pandemic hit, then the guys who would die would be the MSME vendors that we have. So the second was not only having a cash cushion to meet our own debt obligations or regulatory or payroll, but also to always pay our small vendors who have a turnover of, say, less than, I think we had a number 50 crores or something, pay them all within 30 days, because otherwise they would die for sure. So with these two boundary conditions, we identified actually three levels of revenue destruction: 40% versus the last year, 60% and 80%. So we will not ask anybody to go. We will reduce salaries rather than ask individuals. So suppose we want to target a 40% salary reduction, then everybody takes, based on their salaries in the top 800 people, they take salary cuts from 50 going to me to 100, right? So that dropped actually our salary costs enormously. And in other cases, of course, we did what we routinely do. What I found was, and I'm sure every company has found this, is that there is enormous flab that builds into the system over time, especially if you're starting to, you're doing well. So we identified as much as we could. And I joked today with even my board that, there are three types of costs. One are those you defer. So like we renovate hotels every year. So we push that out 1 year. Then there are costs that you cut, which are flab, which are good costs, cutting. And then there are costs that you cut, which are muscle, which is bad cost cutting. But you end up doing it. I was not expecting the lockdown, obviously. but at some level, we were expecting this demand destruction. The lockdown was just confirming that the demand destruction would move towards the worst case scenario. So my reaction was very negative, obviously.
Okay. Mr. Narayan, the first few days, first few hours of the confusion.
Well, I remember, the kind of smoke before the fire was apparent sometime in February itself, and the telltale signs for me was when Nestle globally announced that international travel had been suspended. So that was in February itself. The company had announced globally that we will not have any more travel taking place internationally. I think for me the pivoting point was really the 16th of March when we met we have a COVID crisis committee as a company, which is steered by me, and also which is got manifestations in the different factories and in the different branch offices that we have got. We took a call on that day, and it was still just a little bit of smoke was billowing. But I think collectively we took the call, and finally, of course, as the head of the company, I take the call on this. I said from the next day, 17th of March, I said we will all start to work from home. It was easier said because that's kind of an instruction. But really, it is a tribute to my team, consisting of the people in HR, in administration, in IT, in general services, that in a matter of 48 hours, we had almost 1,000 people. And if you include those in our regional offices, another 1,500 to 2,000 people who had been put on remote working with access and with capabilities to work from home. I honestly thought, Rajiv, that this would be a few days. I mean, I honestly never thought that it would last as long as it has lasted. We also took action across in the factories because there was huge chaos that followed after the first lockdown. And I think what we really focused on, Rajiv, and this is still the top priority for me, is people. I firmly believe that this is the time when you don't run a company, you serve a family. And as a leader and as a management team, we said, look, this is the time for us to serve the constituents who make Nestle.
Mr. Takkar?
First thing that obviously that comes to mind is how are we going to keep our services running? Because people are going to be home. They're not going to be traveling outside. This is their only way of connectivity. And certainly people will not only want to make sure that works and it's always available, but at the same time, potentially the usage will also go up, and we need to make sure that it's working. So I think the biggest issue was how are we going to do that? And with that in mind, the intent was, well, a lot of people will have to be out in the field. How do we make sure that we get the permits for those guys? We are essential service, engaging with the relevant authorities, not only, of course, locally in each of the districts that we were in, but then also the state authorities as well as the national authorities as well. So how to make sure that we'll be working through that. And I think we had significant challenges there initially, which all got eventually ironed out and obviously we improved. But I think the first week that was quite a bit of challenge in that, and I think that was one of the biggest things that we were facing is how do we make sure that the network stays up. The second part was, of course, from a customer perspective, two things that were important, which is besides making the network run, which is if you run out of your validity and you need to recharge, you need to top up, how do they do that when the shops are closed? So making sure that our digital gateways are working, people can do that online. And in cases in which people didn't have online capabilities, how do we make sure our distributors are able to provide them with credit in a way without having to leave their homes and so on. So I think we worked out some processes which were quite good. So not only make sure our network is up and running, but at the same time, actually people as they need to recharge and so on, those capabilities existed. And I think it was quite, it was clearly chaotic, but at the same time, it was actually quite impressive at the speed at which people worked. And then, of course, the last thing was really, we were worried about the health and safety and well-being of our employees. We want to make sure that they are safe, not only in the homes that they're going to be there, But at the same time, how do they get to do the work? How do they actually stay connected to the business as well? I think it was challenging, certainly, but it was at the same time. I think the focus of people, and as I said earlier, that this is, we basically just said we have to find solution to these problems, and no is not an answer. And I think in many cases that's how it ended up being. And so that's how I would describe the first week or so.
Mr. Keswani, as things cleared out, as lockdown opened, how did you go about rebuilding your business? What was it like at that point in time, and what has been the journey so far?
So unlike most companies in the hotel space, we didn't really shut most of our hotels down. So in Q1, which is, I think, in our case, April to June, if I remember right, about 79 or 80% of our rooms were operational. And interestingly, we had about 2,500 employees staying in the hotels. Because like Suresh was saying, we also, had the same thing, that people were coming from outside and coming and working. And we have a very young team, so our average age is maybe 27 or 28. So what we did was that a bunch of people said they want to go on leave, and they had earned leave, so they left. We shut our office also on the 17th of March. So we have about 250 people in our corporate office. They have not come back. And I don't want to open the corporate office till the vaccine is administered. So these people went home. A bunch of employees went home. Whoever were left, they moved them into our hotels. And they were staying in the hotels. And what we did is we kept the hotels, the low demand hotels, let me put it this way, in some form of coma, which means we only kept, in a 100-room hotel, we kept 20 rooms open and just ran it at the lowest possible cost. And now we have 100% of our inventory open. And this was a very gradual process. And the critical thing, I totally agree with Suresh, is this at this time, it is when your employees, your suppliers, your guests, who are themselves so worried and uncertain, that this is when they need support. So we were very clear, we will give that support. And today we have 100% of our inventory running, and about 2,000 employees staying in the hotel. So they're learning also how it is to be a guest. And things are hunky-dory actually for us now.
And recovery in terms of revenue and...
So revenue, in our case, we didn't do so badly. Out of those 12,000 rooms that were sold in April, I remember we did about 1,500. We did about, our fair market share in the branded space is about 5%, and in the mid-market space is 17%. But we did, on an all India basis, we did 12.5% in April. And it has only grown since then.
Narayan?
Yeah, I think, for us really, as I mentioned to you, it was more a question of getting ourselves operationally with our feet on the ground. I think that was the most important part. And really, for me, there are three parts to it. One is our purpose as a company. The company's global purpose, which has stood in good stead for more than 150 years, is food quality and safety. I mean, that's what really we stand for. So during this pandemic, I think one of the things that it went back almost like an instinct to us is to ensure that all the disciplines that we needed across our work sites, be it sanitation, social distancing, masking, thermal checking, etc., we implemented it all from day one, and far more stringently than what any normal player would have done, because we said that is extremely important. We played within that, and we extended this facility also to our suppliers. We have almost 8,000 suppliers, and out of them, about 10-15% of them are what you would call the MSMEs, the micro and small and medium enterprises. We really provided them a huge amount of support, both in terms of training and in terms of equipping, and in terms of orders, advance payments. Exactly the same philosophy that Patu had said before. I said we have to be like a banyan tree. We have to protect everyone who stands underneath it. So I think that was the second piece that we did around partnerships. The same applied to our distributors, same applied to our redistributors, same applied to our frontline distributor salesmen.
Mr. Thakkar?
As I mentioned earlier, I mean, there was a bit of a shock earlier on. I think all of us went into this. How will we do this part? And it is a bit of a sense of overwhelming. How will we deal with the situation? But I think in some ways there were 2-3 things that really were very critical. One, which is we knew that our customers, which are already relying on connectivity, as a very, very important part, are going to be even more reliant on this service. So I think the first and foremost thing on our mind was we needed to make sure that our services remain up and running, independent of the nature of the lockdown or independent of pandemic. So we wanted to make sure that our field forces, that are people who are maintaining our network, are constantly making sure that every cell site is working, is up and running. There's no disruption in the business. How do we do that? And I think our field services team really stepped up. We had discussions with each one of them. We wanted to make sure that we get them the PPE equipment as quickly as possible. We purchased a significant amount of PPE equipment, made sure that all of that was made available to them quickly. They were encouraged to not only, of course, be safe, but at the same time, make sure that they follow the rules for their local and districts that they're in, and they are out there actually supporting people. And not surprisingly, and in many positive ways, the response from the local authorities, the regional authorities, and the national authorities are very, very positive in supporting our employees in making sure that they continue to provide the services. So just like healthcare workers, they were given the right permits, they were given the ability to move around, they were asked many times to go into societies where sites were down to make them up and running and add diesel and so on and so forth. So those type of things that was done very, very, very well. The other part is that we wanted to digitalize and enable our partners, which means our distributors, our retailers, our various points of sale, which were across the country, and we have over 1 million of them across the country. And they're also, again, not only with our field services team in terms of educating them, but also digitalization of the processes really actually came in very, very handy, and we were able to do them quickly. And then last but not least was our employees. Not only the ones which were working on the field, but at the same time, the ones who were working from home, making sure that they were enabled, they were connected. We of course were talking to all of them and making sure that they know what to do in this period of time.
What's been your experience of productivity during this period, Mr. Keswani? What is it like, productivity in work from home?
Well, most of our employees don't work from home. So the corporate office, I actually totally agree with Suresh. We were, in fact, our team and we were all having a conversation how people seem to be able to, deliver the same amount of output as we want, sitting out of home. The only thing that I find missing where people want to come back to office is because of the social need. Our staff to room ratio was 1. We had 8,000 rooms, 8,000 staff, broadly. I'm told now that we can operate the company at 0.7. It's not insignificant. That means we're talking 30% of 8,000 people are actually excess in our system. We've had some attrition, so there are still, and we are opening a bunch of hotels in the next 2 years, about 20 hotels. So we don't need to hire new staff. It's amazing. And that productivity improvement is so much a part of them because people are multi-skilling. You see, you don't have 4 people and say as bellboys, as an example.
Yeah.
And there are only 2. And there are 3 guests. So some guy from security or some guy from the front office or from food and beverage goes and picks up a bag and does it too. And that culture building of multitasking I think is going to play an enormous role for us going forward.
Yeah, Mr. Narayanan.
Yeah, I think I tend to echo what Patu said about efficiency and productivity. I was honestly very, very surprised. I mean, I never expected. People settled into work from home extremely quickly. I know that there have been pain points in terms of infrastructure. People with families. You have your parents, you have your grandparents, you have extended families staying with you. It has not been easy. And I must I must say that for the women employees of the company, it has especially been more difficult times, because they have got multiple responsibilities in addition to managing the role within the company. But having said that, I'm happy to say that the morale of the company continues to be high. The level of engagement has been very high. The level of empowerment, some of it has been forced, because there are some leaders who don't like to empower, who've been forced to empower because they had no other way of getting the job done. So that has happened. Empowerment has been great. Ideation and the quality of ideas that have been coming out is outstanding. Some of the work that we have done on digital, Rajiv, is really outstanding work. Maybe we would have taken a couple of years to get there, but we have now been forced into the digital revolution much faster than the normal cycle. So these have all been positives across the value chain of the company.
Mr. Takkar, what was your experience of productivity during this phase, during the lockdown, and what are the learnings from the productivity front?
Actually, just as Suresh was mentioning earlier, there were many surprises, in the sense that, we in our businesses normally we've all been debating about, how fast we want to accelerate on digitalization, how to be enabled work from home for years, and it was always sort of, you can only do this, you can only do this, you can only go so far, and there were a lot of naysayers. And what we saw was that just because we were put in this situation, actually, when we were put up against it and we were forced to act, actually things moved. Guess what? Businesses adapted. In many cases, things that we never thought could be done, people were able to do it. Just to give you an example, we went into national lockdown at a fairly short notice. Our business, like many businesses, became an essential service. And suddenly, we had to run a nationwide network, which had to be up 99.9% of the time. And many of the things that we do just require physically people to be present on feet on the street, whether it's, recharges, whether it's actually going out and filling diesel, whether it is, as sites go down, doing field services and so on. We automated so many of these things just overnight, and somehow we were able to manage service levels which were as good, if not better. We added, our capacity requirements went up by 30% just in the first week of the lockdown. And suddenly we saw that our capacity expanded, and we were able to add that capacity digitally and through software upgrades, and all done remotely.
So before we close, I wanted to understand from each one of you, what are the major challenges you foresee from here on in dealing with this, and also in the way our economy is in the business arena, because we still haven't, we're still shrinking as an economy. At least we'll continue to shrink this fiscal and beyond this. So what are the big challenges that you're readying yourself and your organizations with to cope with?
I really see, Rajiv, four big challenges that the post-pandemic era will throw upon us. Number one is managing the uncertainty of the post-pandemic world. Number two is companies and organizations will have to learn to manage operations while changing the wheels of the car in motion. You're not going to have the advantage of stopping the car and addressing a flat tire. You have to keep running the car, change the flat tire, and ensure that you're going in the right direction. So the challenge in terms of operating capabilities is going to become manifold as a consequence of this. Number three is managing people. I think people have made up their minds. They know that a crisis throws up the best and worst in people. They know what kind of organizations they're in, what kind of leadership they're faced, what is the look and smell of the place when things are difficult. So managing people will be a very key metrics. And finally, as businesses, managing expectations. Expectations of your employees, expectations of your stakeholders, expectations of your shareholders. The fact of the matter is that all these steady state principles that we will continue to click at a particular growth rate irrespective of what happens around you is now thrown to the winds.
I would agree with Suresh. I think those are critical elements. Maybe one or two more things to add. I think one thing that in my mind will become challenging and will continue to, is that the consumer behavior is changing at a, it was changing already, but it's changing at a much faster pace now. And while I think we have done an incredible job in the last year in adapting to changes in consumer behaviors, but the speed at which it is going to change going forward, I think we have to adapt our companies and we have to adapt our businesses at a pace which is going to be very different. And I think that in a sustained manner, not in an emergency or not in a crisis manner, but I think because the speed is now so fast, we have to maintain that speed. And I think that creates a challenge that we have not seen. The second part to me is, again, adding on to it, is around employees. The skill sets that are required and going to be required going forward are going to be very different, not only from how do you manage people, how do you work from home, how do you actually do some of the things that you used to do, and how we measure people is going to be different. But the skill set that the employees need to actually perform in this new world that's going to be forward, I think that's going to be quite different as well.
Mr. Keswani?
Well, I think there are 4 things personally, as in our business, I'd be worried about or focusing on. One is, of course, digitalization. So we find it has helped us a lot in both customer outreach and efficiency. I think we are going to focus heavily. So earlier, what we may have perhaps done over a 4-year window, we will try and do this year itself. That's the first point. Second is, I think one of the biggest changes is going to be demand from different segments for us. Interestingly, we find in our retail segment, where we have in our loyalty program 1.5 million guests, actually, regular members, that's jumped up first. So I think if I want to look at de-risking myself, and I'm linking it to my earlier comment, then one is I want to focus on these emerging new segments and their needs, rather than the old traditional segments like corporates and so on and so forth. So that's linked to our digital strategy, outreach, and so on. My view is that 4 years from now, and we do this 4-year plan annually, actually, the kind of customers we will have will be completely different to the customers we had pre-COVID. That's a 5-year window. So we need to identify these new customers and their needs. Third is asset light. I think the other thing I don't want is the level of assets on our balance sheet. I don't want anymore. So we'll have to find a creative way to divest them. And I think the last is, when I look on a 10-15-year window out, I feel that work from home, digital, better communication and so on and so forth means that there will be less business travel as an entity put together. And therefore, I think people will be more and more leisure focused, which is ironic, because the last 50 years in the hotel business, leisure hotels were always far less profitable and far more seasonal than business hotels. So the next question is, how do we capture a disproportionate share of supply of leisure assets in India and around India, because that's where we operate. So I mean, it's no rocket science. These are evident to us. So we'll work on that.
Well, Mr. Narayanan, Mr. Takkar, and Mr. Keswani, I think phenomenal insights, lot to munch over, and amazing understanding from your learnings from your discussion. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being part of Business Today Mind Rush.
ThyroCare, the trust, the truth.
We have a special message from Mr. Frederick Vidal, VP and Head of South Asia and Managing Director, India.
Congratulations, Frederick, on recently marking 25 years in India. We would like to start the conversation with, pandemic has disrupted business models, questioned many pre-existing notions. It has made leaders rethink about centralized supply chains, sustainability, product lines, and how they do business in general. Can you share what are the paradigms that the pandemic has made you question?
I think that's a very interesting question. And when you go through these type of crises, everything is up for change, to be honest. And if you don't have that attitude, I think you will perish. So some of the changes that we have notice then is the significant reduction in the dependency on office centricity. And before that was also an image thing, right? To be present and have your logos in physical locations, etc. We have closed 11 offices during 2020. And we have realized that those offices are no longer needed. There's a different need for investing same money that went perhaps towards these offices into different aspects of the business, digital of course being one. So I think office centricity, working from home actually works. I never expected that. I would say that in that essence, I'm probably a traditionalist. I didn't like people working from home. I didn't like working from home, pre-pandemic. And now I think it actually is a very, very good combination. Not 100%, I don't think, but 1 or 2 days a week, work from home and be quiet and work on the things that matter, etc., etc. So very interesting. Another thing I think is also traveling. Traveling will be important in the future, but significantly less important. And we have already said that nobody will travel in the future for the purpose of reviewing numbers. Nobody. We will travel to build culture, but not the reviewing numbers. That is easily done on Zoom or Teams or whatever platform you prefer, So there's a bunch of learnings. And perhaps also another part that we have learned, but maybe perhaps which is more of a challenge, is how do you build a culture virtually? That is much more difficult than physically, of course. So that is a challenge, has been a challenge. I think we already in Oriflame have such a strong culture, so that has remained in the past year. But, as we go along, we need to figure out how we drive culture virtually as well.
A lot of businesses during the pandemic came online. They listed themselves on the whole aggregator model. And Oriflame has largely stuck to its original script of direct selling, word of mouth. So how do you see that strategy in the post-pandemic world? Do you think that it is still possible to stick to it? And what will then be the digital strategy moving on?
I think it's an interesting question. And direct selling, as you say, has evolved over the past decade. And it has evolved significantly in the past couple of years. And of course, then enormously during the pandemic. And today, our industry is better referred to as social selling. And the word of mouth is equally important for any business, regardless of industry. In our businesses, it's super important too. And this word of mouth is the same. It's just digital now. And you can reach out to many more people with whatever you want to talk about. So from that aspect, that really and truly goes in our favor.
So Fredrik, are there any questions or any last thoughts that you would like to share? Any lessons learned, on your personal capacity as a leader, on how you will do things differently next year? One, work from home certainly is one. Apart from that, anything else?
I think it's good. And actually, I was thinking about this the other day, and I actually wrote a LinkedIn feature on this recently.
Okay.
And from a leadership point of view, I think that 2021 will be similar to 2020, yet different. And I think as a leader, you need to really focus on a couple of attitudes and attributes in your organization going forward. And I think innovation must be in the forefront. And not only innovations when it comes to products, but innovations all around, like you mentioned in the beginning, Soma, strategies for the future. Then you need to have guts. You need to have guts to implement those things. And things that might be scary to you, you have to just have guts to do things differently. And I think lastly, you need empathy. I hope that the 20s, we're now in the 20s, I hope the 20s is the decade of empathy. And empathy is the understanding of other people's situations, not sympathy. Those two words are different. And I think empathic organizations build and cement culture. So that's what I will drive going forward.
I'm very passionate about trekking, walking in general. When I'm, feeling slightly low, I would want to, kind of go out and take a long walk, sometimes 2 hours also. During the lockdown, for example, I started something called, Mumbai on foot, which I started with my son. So we used to go Saturday mornings, 2.5, 3 hours of walk, and we used to walk on the roads of Mumbai. So I have now seen Mumbai on foot for like really well. So walking, trekking, challenging myself, on exercise, etc., yoga is something that, I have really got into in the last 1.5 years. Mantra is, getting those 3-4 hours early in the morning. I like to get up early, irrespective of whatever hour I sleep. I like to get up at around 5:30, 6 o'clock. Those 3-4 hours are very precious for me. I do varied things, starting from cycling to yoga to, I like to mix it up so that it is not boring. The place that I want to go back every time is Leh. Leh Ladakh I have done many times. It's a place that keeps calling you. Once you are there, you have to go there every year. With family, definitely one vacation, in Goa every year. And if we get an opportunity to go out of India, then great. But Goa and Leh is something that I think I like to go back, every year. Passionate about cars, something that I indulged in very early. Even when I could not afford it, I thought, let me drive this car. So that's my, prized possession. Otherwise, I'm quite a family person. If I'm with my family for a long time, it is very precious for me. So I really, enjoy those hours.